Everything started back in 2014. Sandra was 27. I was 26. We had been together for 5 years and married for 2. We first crossed paths in college. She was deep into her accounting studies, while I was working my way through a mechanical engineering degree. Our first meeting happened at a party thrown by a mutual friend, and from the moment we started talking, there was an instant connection. A few dates later, we made it official. Fast forward a year, and we were walking down the aisle. Sandra had an older sister, Serena, who was married to Arnold, a close friend of hers. But the real hurdle in our relationship came from Sandra's mother, Isabella. She never accepted me, not from the very start. It felt like she was always searching for a reason to drive a wedge between us. I could see it in her eyes. She didn't like me, though I never really understood why. She made her feelings clear every chance she got, throwing out comments like, "Sandra deserves better or you'll never be good enough for her." It was humiliating, exhausting even, but despite that, I truly believed I had a great life. Sandra was everything. Stunning, intelligent, and the most incredible woman I had ever met. My job as a mechanical engineer paid well, and we were in a solid place. We both agreed that having kids could wait. We wanted to travel, finish paying off the house, and just enjoy life a little longer. Sandra was fully on board, even considering going for a master's degree, which I was more than happy to support financially. More than anything, I wanted her to feel encouraged, to know I had her back. But a year into our marriage, things started shifting. Isabella had a fall and ended up in the hospital for a couple of days. The doctors reassured us that it wasn't anything serious, but they strongly advised her to take it easy and rest. Sandra was beside herself with worry, completely wrapped up in her mother's condition. I could see how much it affected her. She stayed by Isabella's side throughout the recovery, and while I understood, I couldn't help but wish we had more time together. Then came the night of the anniversary party. Sandra's parents were celebrating 30 years of marriage, and what should have been a joyful evening took an unexpected turn. 2 major announcements were made, both of them leaving me stunned. First, Serena, who had been trying for years to get pregnant, shared devastating news. After countless trips to fertility specialists and exhausting every option, she still couldn't conceive. I saw the pain in her eyes as she spoke, the heartbreak written all over her face. It was one of those moments where you desperately want to take someone's pain away, but know there's nothing you can do. Then came Isabella's announcement, and it hit even harder. I had always known she wasn't the warmest person, but her words that night carried an emotional weight I hadn't seen before. Tears welled in her eyes as she made a desperate confession. She longed to be a grandmother. "A fall could be the end of me," she said, her voice shaky. "Who knows how much time I have left? I watched her grow up, and all I want now is to see her children." I turned to Sandra, and the look on her face said everything. She had gone pale, her eyes wide with shock. Her hands trembled as she reached for her wine, but it was clear she wasn't really drinking it. Her mother's words had rattled her to her core. When we got home, Sandra was still quiet, lost in thought. I tried to give her space, but after a while, I couldn't hold back anymore. "Sandra," I said softly, sitting beside her on the couch, "are you okay?" She turned to me, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "I don't know, Alex," she whispered. I just don't know. Is it your mom?" I asked cautiously. She nodded, her voice breaking. "She's right, though. She won't be around forever. And Serena, she's going through so much. I don't know what to do." I wrapped my arms around her, holding her close. "We don't have to decide anything right now," I reassured her. "We'll figure it out, together." But even as I said the words, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. Isabella's plea for grandchildren had left a deep impression on Sandra, and I could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. I should have addressed it, should have had a real conversation about what was happening, but I didn't. I ignored it, and looking back now, I know that was a mistake, one I would come to regret. Weeks passed, then months. Nothing major happened, and for a while, it felt like life was settling back into its usual rhythm. Until the day I got the call. Sandra's voice was barely holding together on the other end of the line. "Alex, I'm at the hospital." My stomach dropped. What? What happened?" "It's Serena," she choked out. She tried to hurt herself." I froze. A sickening knot twisted in my chest. "Are you okay?" I asked, even though it felt like the wrong thing to say. "I'm fine," she said quickly, but her voice was shaky. "But Alex, she's in critical condition. I need you here." "I'm on my way," I said without hesitation, forcing my voice to stay steady. She didn't need to hear how terrified I was. I got to the hospital as fast as I could. When I arrived, Sandra was in the waiting room, her face pale, her eyes swollen from crying. But what caught my attention immediately was Isabella, standing stiffly off to the side, her expression unreadable, yet somehow cold. And the way she looked at me, it sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't just sadness or worry in her eyes. It was something more. Blame. I felt it the second she laid eyes on me, though I had no idea why. I pulled Sandra into a hug, trying to comfort her, but the unease lingered. Arnold was there, along with Marco and Isabella's husband, but none of them could make the atmosphere feel any less tense. Anxiety filled the room, but Isabella's distant, almost accusing stare was what unsettled me the most. I finally found my voice. "What happened?" I asked quietly. Sandra swallowed hard. "It's the infertility, Alex," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And just like that, everything changed. Serena had been battling this for years. She had tried everything, but after Mom's emotional outburst about wanting grandchildren, it finally pushed her over the edge. The pressure became unbearable, and she just couldn't take it anymore. A deep, sickening feeling settled in my chest. I couldn't even begin to imagine the pain Serena was going through, but I knew it had to be devastating. 2 days later, she was discharged from the hospital, shaken, but physically okay. The doctors prescribed antidepressants to help her cope, but I could tell that no medication could truly erase the weight of everything she had been carrying. In an attempt to process what had happened, the whole family gathered at Isabella's house. The atmosphere was tense, thick with unspoken words and sidelong glances. As we all sat in the living room, the inevitable topic surfaced again: grandchildren. The sting of Serena's infertility was still fresh, and Isabella's words from the anniversary party still hung in the air like a ghost that refused to leave. I hesitated, knowing what I was about to say wouldn't be well received, but I also felt it needed to be said. What if you and Arnold consider adoption?" I suggested, trying to keep my voice even. "It could be a way for you to build a family, even if it's not by blood. Adoption is real, and it could bring so much joy." The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye in the room was on me. I could feel the weight of their stares, the tension crackling like static electricity. Isabella's expression darkened as she turned to me, her voice sharp and unyielding. "Adopt?" she repeated, as if the very idea was offensive. "That is not the same as having a real grandchild. Our grandchild. A child from our own bloodline." Her words landed like a slap, and I had to fight the frustration building inside me. I wasn't suggesting it to dismiss the importance of family. I suggested it because I genuinely believed it could offer Serena and Arnold the family they had longed for. But Isabella wasn't hearing any of it. After that, the conversation collapsed into uneasy silence. No more ideas, no more suggestions. Just a suffocating weight of unresolved tension pressing down on all of us. We left shortly after, and I could tell from the way Sandra stayed quiet that she was just as frustrated as I was. In the weeks that followed, I noticed a shift. Serena and Arnold started coming over more often. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal, but something about their visits felt off. They would arrive, and I could hear them whispering in the kitchen, their voices low and secretive. But the moment they stepped into the living room, they would go silent. It was strange, unsettling. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening, something they didn't want me to know. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe Serena just needed Sandra's support after everything she had been through. But then, Sandra started acting differently too. She became more secretive with her phone, tucking it away whenever I walked into the room. She distanced herself from me, flinching away when I reached for her. Our intimacy, once natural and effortless, started fading away. The space between us widened, and I couldn't figure out why. Then came July 5th. That day is burned into my memory. I pulled into our street after work and immediately noticed the cars parked outside our house. My stomach twisted into a knot. Something was wrong. I rushed inside and found my in-laws, Serena, and Arnold all gathered in the living room. Their expressions were heavy, grim. The moment Sandra saw me, she spoke. "Sit down." "We need to talk," she said, her voice tight. I glanced around at the faces watching me, each one filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. My pulse quickened. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Before Sandra could answer, Isabella cut in, her tone clipped and impatient. "What solution can you give us?" she demanded. I blinked, confused. Solution? For what? Isabella exchanged a look with Sandra before turning back to me. Her eyes were cold, unrelenting. "For the grandchildren," she said, her voice laced with something I couldn't quite name. A wave of frustration crashed over me. I don't understand," I stammered. I tried to offer a solution that had been lingering in my mind for a while. Maybe we should look into IVF. It's not a guarantee, but it could help." The moment the words left my mouth, I saw Isabella's expression twist into one of pure disgust. Her disapproval was unmistakable. No, she muttered, almost to herself. Then, as if something had just clicked in her mind, she straightened and looked at me with an eerie kind of certainty. "I have another solution." The air in the room shifted, and a chill ran down my spine. I turned to Sandra, looking for reassurance, for some sign that this wasn't about to go where I thought it was. But she wasn't looking at me. Her gaze flickered between her mother and Serena. I swallowed hard and turned my attention to Serena. That's when I saw it. She was smiling, and not just any smile. It was subtle, but there was something deeply unsettling about it. Arnold, sitting beside her, leaned back in his chair with an expression I could only describe as smug. His eyes flickered with something that made my skin crawl. The tension in the room was unbearable. I waited for Sandra to say something, anything, but she just sat there, staring at the floor, her face unreadable. And then, out of nowhere, she snapped, "Idiot, say something." Her voice cut through the silence like a blade, and I flinched. I had no idea why she was so angry, but my mind was racing, trying to piece it all together. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then, in a voice that made my blood run cold, Isabella spoke again. "As you know, dear," she said, addressing Sandra, her tone disturbingly calm, "Serena has been cursed with the impossibility of giving us grandchildren." My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't know what she was about to say next, but I knew, deep down, that whatever it was, it would change everything. That joy of motherhood, the one she'll never experience. Isabella's voice trailed off, thick with judgment, as if Serena's infertility was some kind of personal failure. Sandra cut in, her tone sharp. "We've looked into other options," she said, her voice tight with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. "But surrogacy, it's risky. There are genetic and hereditary concerns, things that could affect future generations." She shook her head, looking drained. Arnold, never one to stay quiet for long, jumped in. "Surrogacy is expensive," he added flatly. "It's just not something we can afford. Not with everything else a child would require." I was barely keeping up, my mind spinning. but I wasn't about to let them dismiss me like this. So, what exactly are you suggesting? I asked, my voice tense, trying to steady myself against the growing unease clawing at my chest. Then, Isabella dropped the bombshell. If he refuses to have children, she said, her words deliberate, then Sandra will conceive with Arnold. I froze. The world around me blurred as the weight of her statement crashed over me. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I felt the blood drain from my face. Pregnant, with Arnold. Sandra, my wife. Arnold, my brother-in-law. I turned to her, searching for something, denial, disgust, anything. But she wouldn't look at me. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, the silence between us thick and suffocating. Pregnant, with Arnold. I struggled to breathe, my hands clenching into fists as I swallowed hard, willing this to be some kind of sick joke. But it wasn't. Isabella kept talking, as if what she had just said was the most rational thing in the world. We understand that you don't want to raise the baby, she said, her tone as cold as steel. Don't worry. Once the child is born, we'll register it under Serena and Arnold's names. I felt the room closing in on me. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. But she wasn't done. With an air of moral superiority, she continued, children are not products. They aren't created in laboratories. They must be conceived through love, through the sacred bond of a couple. In other words, through coitus. Her words made my stomach turn. She carried on, citing religious beliefs, claiming that artificial conception was against the will of God, that if her grandchild wasn't conceived the natural way, it would be condemned. I couldn't take another second of it. Before I even realized what I was doing, I shot up from my seat, my voice booming through the room. No way. I wasn't someone who raised his voice often, but I couldn't hold back anymore. This was insanity. I turned to Sandra, desperate for her to say something, to stand up against this madness. Sandra, I said, my voice raw with emotion. What do you have to say about this? She finally looked at me, her expression wavering between confusion and something else, fear. But she didn't speak. She didn't deny it. She didn't defend me. The silence was worse than anything she could have said. Isabella, still unfazed, met my gaze with defiance. She had clearly not expected my outburst, but instead of backing down, she doubled down, as if I was the one being unreasonable. Then Arnold, who had been sitting quietly until now, stepped toward me and placed a hand on my shoulder. I recoiled. Don't touch me, I snapped, stepping back, my anger boiling over. Isabella sighed, shaking her head like I was some foolish child who just didn't understand. We respect your decision not to have children, she said in that condescending tone I had come to despise. But we also know that you're young. You still have the urge to explore. So Arnold will take care of it. I blinked, my mind struggling to process what she was saying. What? She continued, her voice unwavering. Serena agrees that her son should be conceived in love. That means it must be between Sandra and Arnold. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't happening. This wasn't real. I stared at her, waiting for anyone, to snap out of this madness, to say this was a mistake, a joke, a misunderstanding. And then I saw it. Serena was smiling. It wasn't a big grin, just a small, satisfied smirk. But it was there. Arnold, sitting beside her, leaned back with a look of pure arrogance. There was an air of victory about him, like he had already won. I felt something inside me snap. You're insane, you old witch, I shouted, my voice shaking with fury. The entire room fell silent. Serena gasped. Sandra's face twisted in anger, but there was something else. Regret? Guilt? I couldn't tell. Arnold just smirked, that smug look never leaving his face. Come on, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. It'll be fun. That was it. I don't even remember moving. 1 second, I was standing there, and the next, my fist connected with his face. He went down hard. The room erupted into chaos. Serena screamed. Sandra shouted. Their voices blurred together. But I couldn't focus on anything except the burning anger coursing through me. "Get out of my house!" I roared, my voice hoarse from the rage. I didn't wait for them to respond. I turned and stormed into the bedroom, slamming the door behind me and locking it. I could still hear their voices from the other side of the house, but I didn't care. Moments later, I watched through the window as they finally left. But it wasn't over. Not even close. Sandra burst into the room, her face flushed with anger, but there was something else beneath it. Pain? I didn't care. "You offended my mother," she yelled, her voice trembling. I stared at her, disbelief washing over me. That's what she's mad about, not the fact that they had just tried to convince her to sleep with Arnold. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You're ignoring the real issue here, Sandra. They're manipulating you into sleeping with your brother-in-law." Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing, just glared at me, her eyes burning with resentment. She didn't speak to me for the rest of the day. That night, I couldn't stay in the house any longer. I went to see my best friend, Elliot, the only person I could trust. Elliot listened as I vented, shaking his head in disbelief. "This is insane, Alex," he said firmly. "Your mother-in-law is behind all of this. She's the one pulling the strings." I nodded, the weight of it all crashing down on me again. I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just a disagreement. This was war. Elliot was right. My mother-in-law was the mastermind behind all this insanity. One night, after hearing me vent for hours, Elliot said something that sounded crazy at first, but in hindsight made perfect sense. "Maybe it's time to leave the city, Alex. Take Sandra. Get away from all this mess. The less you're around her family, the less control they have over you both." At first, I brushed it off. Running away from my problems had never been my style. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Being away from her family, away from all the pressure, sounded like exactly what I needed. I just wasn't sure if I was ready to admit it. That evening, when I got home, I found Sandra sitting at the kitchen table, her face blotchy and red. She had been crying. I stopped in my tracks, guilt churning in my stomach. I hated seeing her like this, but I had no idea what to say. "Sandra?" My voice came out softer than I intended. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with fresh tears. "My mom's been hospitalized," she whispered, her voice shaking. "She's in critical condition." I didn't even think before I responded. The bitterness had been sitting inside me for too long, and before I could stop myself, the word slipped out, sharp and cold. "That old witch can die for all I care. And I hope it's agonizing." Sandra recoiled as if I had physically struck her. She collapsed into herself, sobbing uncontrollably. I watched her for a long moment, my own heart sinking. I knew I had been too harsh, but after everything her mother had put me through, I just couldn't bring myself to care. Still, I sighed, trying to rein in my anger. "I didn't mean to be so blunt, but your mother has given me absolutely no reason to respect her." Sandra wiped her tears with the back of her hand and looked at me with a deep sadness I hadn't seen before. "You don't understand, Alex," she whispered. "Serena, she's still not okay. I'm scared she's going to hurt herself again." I didn't know how to respond to that. Serena's mental health was fragile, and I wasn't equipped to handle it. Silence stretched between us before I found myself saying something I never thought I would. "We'll try," I said. "We'll try to have a baby. Our baby. Just you and me." The words tasted foreign in my mouth, but I said them anyway. I didn't want to. I wasn't ready. But I didn't see any other way to hold everything together. Sandra's face lit up, relief washing over her features. "It's okay," she murmured, smiling softly. "We'll try soon." But deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't about us. This wasn't about starting a family because we wanted to. This was about keeping the peace, keeping her family at bay. And that sat like a rock in my chest. Days passed, then weeks. Something changed in Sandra. She became more affectionate, more present, as if the weight that had been hanging over her had finally lifted. She stopped hiding her phone. She smiled at me more often, really smiled. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were falling back into the love we once had. But something still felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew it was there, a shadow lurking beneath the surface. 6 months passed. Somehow, I found myself even deeper in love with Sandra than before. I don't know how it happened, but whatever she wanted, I gave it to her. A new TV? Bought. A spa day? Booked. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was me trying to make up for the past. Maybe it was just easier than questioning things. The pressure for a baby had eased. Isabella had backed off. Serena was improving. Everything seemed better. I should have felt relieved. And yet, I didn't. Still, I pushed forward. I even planned something special for Sandra. A surprise to show her how much I cared, how much I wanted to move forward together. February 20th. I walked through the front door, gripping the plane tickets in my hand. A romantic getaway. Just the two of us. Something to hit the reset button. But as soon as I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The house was eerily quiet. At first, I thought maybe Sandra had just stepped out. But as I moved upstairs, that feeling of unease grew stronger. I pushed open the bedroom door and stopped cold. A note, sitting on the bed. I recognized Sandra's handwriting instantly. My heart pounded as I picked it up, my fingers trembling. And as I read the first words, my stomach dropped. Alex, you see that nothing in our relationship changes. Elliot had been right all along. My mother-in-law was at the center of all this madness, pulling the strings from the shadows. One night, as I sat in his apartment, drowning in frustration, he said something that seemed absurd at first, but in hindsight, it made perfect sense. Maybe it's time to leave, Alex. Take Sandra, get out of this place. The farther you are from her family, the less control they have over both of you. I wanted to reject the idea outright. Running had never been my style, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that getting away wasn't just about escaping them. It was about saving myself. That evening, when I got home, Sandra was sitting at the kitchen table, her face blotchy and red. She had been crying. I stopped in my tracks, unease settling in my stomach. I hated seeing her like this, but after everything, I wasn't sure how much sympathy I had left to give. Sandra? My voice came out softer than I expected. She looked up at me, her eyes brimming with fresh tears. My mom's in the hospital, she whispered. She's in critical condition. Before I could stop myself, the bitterness that had been festering inside me spilled out. That old witch can die for all I care, I said coldly, and I hope it's painful. Sandra recoiled as if I had slapped her. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. I watched her, my chest tightening with guilt, but not enough to take back what I said. I exhaled sharply. I didn't mean to be so harsh, but your mother has given me no reason to respect her. Sandra wiped at her tears, looking up at me with something unreadable in her eyes. You don't understand, Alex, she whispered. Serena, she's still struggling. I'm scared she's going to hurt herself again. I didn't know how to respond. Serena's mental health was fragile, but I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do about it. Silence stretched between us. Then, before I even realized what I was saying, the words left my mouth. We'll try. I swallowed hard. We'll try to have a baby. Just you and me. Sandra's face lit up instantly, relief washing over her features. It's okay, she murmured, smiling softly. We'll try soon. But deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't about us. This wasn't about love. This was about keeping the peace. The days passed uneventfully. Something in Sandra changed. She became more affectionate, more present, as if a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She stopped hiding her phone. She smiled at me more. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were finally okay, but something still felt off. I couldn't explain it, but I knew it was there, lurking beneath the surface. 6 months went by. Somehow, I found myself more in love with Sandra than I had ever been. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was me trying to make up for all the chaos we had been through. Whatever she wanted, I gave it to her. A new TV? Done. A spa day? Booked. It didn't matter. As long as she was happy, I convinced myself I was too. The pressure for a baby had faded. Isabella had backed off. Serena seemed to be doing better. Everything was finally normal. Or so I thought. February 20th. I walked through the front door, gripping the plane tickets tightly. A romantic getaway. Just the two of us. A fresh start. But as soon as I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The house was silent. Too silent. At first, I thought maybe Sandra had just stepped out. But as I climbed the stairs, a pit formed in my stomach. I pushed open the bedroom door and stopped cold. A note sat on the bed. I recognized Sandra's handwriting immediately. My heart pounded as I picked it up, my fingers trembling. Alex, you see that nothing in our relationship changes. I kept reading, each word hitting me like a punch to the gut. I love you more than ever, and I know you love me too. My mother has become more affectionate toward you. She appreciates you in her own way. But Serena cannot be happy, and the guilt of not giving her a grandchild is destroying her. I hadn't told you, but I know you'll understand. You've changed these past months. You're more mature, and I know you love me too much to fight this. My parents, Serena, and Arnold will follow through with what we planned 6 months ago. Today, we are leaving town. I will get pregnant by Arnold. I won't tell you where we're going because I know you. And I know you'd only cause unnecessary stress for me. And for Arnold. Serena told me he gets nervous, and maybe we won't conceive on the first try. That's why we'll be gone for a month. Don't look for us. I will return when I am pregnant. This doesn't change our relationship. We will pretend that nothing happened. No one else in the family knows, and that's how it will stay, just between us. I stood there, frozen. An overwhelming wave of humiliation and sadness crashed over me. I won't lie. It hurt more than anything I had ever felt before. But in that moment, something inside me snapped. There was no trust here. No mutual respect. This wasn't about love. It was about control. Sandra had walked all over me, and Isabella had orchestrated everything from behind the scenes. Just like always. For so long, I had convinced myself that this relationship was real, that Sandra cared about me the way she said she did. But I had been a fool, and now I didn't feel sadness anymore. I felt indifference. 2 days passed before I came to a brutal realization. I had been played. Sandra and her mother had manipulated me so masterfully that I had spent years in the dark, convinced I was the obedient husband who just had to forgive everything. I hated myself for allowing it, but not anymore. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. I drove straight to Sandra's parents' house, my mind racing with everything I was about to confront. When I got there, their cars were gone, exactly as the note had said. They had already left. The humiliation sank even deeper. They had planned this down to the last detail, keeping me in the dark until the very end. I went home, furious. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone and called Elliot. He picked up after a few rings. "Hey, man," he said, concern in his voice. "What happened? You okay?" I took a deep breath, my throat tightening. "No," I admitted. "Sandra's gone. She left to get pregnant by Arnold. Like we were never even married." Elliot exhaled heavily. "Man, that's messed up. That's a hell of a betrayal." I didn't answer. I just felt lost. "What are you going to do?" he asked again. I stared at the table in front of me, my grip tightening around my beer bottle. "Nothing," I said quietly. I don't even want to look for her. I just want it all to be over. That night, I tried calling Sandra. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She had left it behind. I wasn't surprised. It was just another way to keep me from reaching her. By the weekend, the anger had consumed me. I was done. So I made a plan. I emptied our bank accounts, canceled our credit cards, sold my car. Then I bought a one-way ticket to Canada. Sandra and her family had taken everything from me. Now, it was my turn to disappear. But 3 weeks later, a notification popped up on Sandra's phone. A message in the family group chat titled Baby. I hesitated. Then curiosity got the best of me. I opened it, and what I saw made my heart sink. It's finally happened, family. After more than 20 attempts, we will finally have a grandchild. I stared at the message, my breath caught in my throat. I hesitated for a second before clicking on the attached photos. The first image hit me like a punch to the gut. Arnold stood beside Sandra, grinning like he had just won the lottery. Sandra lay in bed, wearing nothing but her underwear, her expression exhausted yet satisfied. I didn't need to guess what had just happened. The second image was even worse, a positive pregnancy test. Sandra was pregnant. By him. I felt my world collapse. The anger, the sadness, the humiliation, it all came crashing down at once. But I was too far away now in Canada, and there was no going back. Not after everything. The messages kept coming. Congratulations, from Serena. We finally did it, from Arnold. And in the middle of it all, my wife, Sandra, acting as if this was the most normal thing in the world. I turned off the phone and threw it onto the couch. I needed to breathe. I couldn't let myself spiral. I threw myself into job hunting, desperate for any distraction. Luckily, my engineering background and language skills landed me a position at a small factory. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough to survive. And most importantly, it was far away from the lies of my past life. A week into my new job, I woke up to a message on Sandra's phone. Love, I'm home. Everything went well, and I'm pregnant. Come soon. I have something to tell you. I stared at the screen. The audacity. After everything, she really thought I'd just come running back? I didn't respond. Instead, I spent the day walking through the streets of Toronto, trying to clear my head. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me again. But then, more messages came in. Darling, come home. We need to talk about this. Then another. Also, the accounts are empty and the cards aren't working. I need money for groceries. I smirked at that one. Good. Let Arnold and her family take care of her now. She wasn't my problem anymore. The calls started next. Sandra, Serena, Arnold. Their names flashed across the screen over and over, but I just kept rejecting them. By the afternoon, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Desperate texts, missed calls, pleading voicemails. I felt nothing but satisfaction. And then, out of nowhere, my father called. I hesitated before answering. Alex, his voice was tense. We need to talk. Your mother's worried about you. Why are you ignoring Sandra? I clenched my jaw. Dad, just stay out of it. I can't do this anymore. I'm done with all of them. He was quiet for a moment before sighing. Alex, this is a family matter. Don't make any rash decisions. You need to come home. Home? To what? The home they destroyed? I wasn't going back. But my father, ever the voice of reason, kept pushing. Son, think about what you're doing. Your mother wants to help you through this. We can fix things. Fix things? There was nothing to fix. Sandra had made her choice. And so had I. I ended the call, but the message was clear. Even my father was trying to pull me back into that mess. 2 days later, he called again. This time, I told him everything, from the betrayal to the note Sandra had left behind. And finally, I sent him screenshots of the WhatsApp messages. At first, he was silent, like he couldn't believe what he was reading. You're telling me she was with Arnold? Your brother-in-law, he asked, his voice almost disbelieving. "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "She's pregnant by him. It's real." There was a long silence. Then, in a voice filled with barely contained fury, my father said, I can't believe this. That bitch." I could practically hear his blood boiling through the phone. "Alex, stick to your decision. You're better off without her. I'm with you, son. Screw that old mother-in-law and screw that bitch wife of yours." For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had someone on my side. "If they call again, I'll deal with them my way," he added. "Yeah, I know," I muttered. "I'm not going back. I don't want anything to do with them anymore." I told him that as soon as I was financially stable, I'd bring him to Canada with me. Then I asked him to block Sandra and her family. I wanted them completely cut out of my life. For the next 15 days, I turned my phone off. I refused to hear from anyone, Sandra, her family, even mutual friends. I bought a new phone, set all my social media to private. I didn't even bother blocking Sandra or her family. I just hid them from my life. I didn't need their messages haunting me anymore. Then one day, I got a message from Elliot. She came to see me, man. I frowned and opened the chat. "Sandra showed up at my door today, desperate, asking where you were." My stomach tightened, but I kept reading. I told her she could have asked you herself, while she was busy screwing her brother-in-law. Then I slammed the door in her face and threatened to call the police. I exhaled, a small smirk creeping onto my face. Hearing that felt good. Sandra thought she could just walk back into my life, expecting things to go back to the way they were. But she was wrong. This was over. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Knowing that someone had finally stood up to Sandra on my behalf gave me a small sense of justice. Elliot told me she was a mess, and honestly, I wasn't surprised. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with the consequences. 2 weeks later, I turned my phone back on. What I saw made my stomach turn. Over 100 messages and dozens of missed calls. Most of them were from Sandra. Her messages were filled with desperate pleas. "Alex, please, I still love you. This means nothing. I want to give you your first child." This was for my sister. "Don't ignore me. Please answer. I love you." Her voice in the audio recordings was broken, filled with emotion, but I felt nothing. I had made my decision. Then there were the messages from Isabella. She was furious. She called me irresponsible, selfish, blamed me for ruining her grandchild's future. She claimed Sandra was losing weight from the stress, that she had been hospitalized after a nervous breakdown. I didn't care. I blocked her number without a second thought. I didn't respond to anyone, and as the days passed, I finally started to heal. My father moved in with me in Canada, and having him there was a relief. He adjusted well to his new life, and I focused on building my own. I found a better job, one that paid well and allowed me to live comfortably. For the first time in a long time, things were looking up. Then, something happened that I never expected. I was granted permanent residency in Canada. I had built a new life for myself from the ground up, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. With the help of a good lawyer, I filed for divorce. Sandra was served soon after. We included her own handwritten note in the divorce petition, proving that she willingly abandoned the marriage. We also submitted screenshots of the WhatsApp messages as evidence. I pushed for a dissolution of marriage rather than just a simple divorce. Sandra kept sending messages, but at that point, it was just noise. Then, months later, I heard the news Sandra had miscarried. The child was gone. Isabella, of course, blamed me. She said I had caused the miscarriage by giving Sandra depression, that my abandonment had killed her grandchild. But Sandra? She turned against her own family. She cut ties with them, claiming they had pressured her into sleeping with Arnold and having his child. I knew better. She wasn't trying to make things right. She was just trying to absolve herself of responsibility. But I didn't care. She kept trying to find me, kept trying to reach out. She thought I'd come back. She was wrong. Then, one day, I got a video call from Sandra. I hesitated before answering. Maybe I wanted to see how she was. Maybe I wanted to see if there was anything left of the woman I once knew. But when her face appeared on the screen, I barely recognized her. She looked exhausted, not just physically, emotionally. The weight of her choices, the consequences of her actions, it had finally caught up to her. The guilt was eating her alive. She immediately tried to apologize, but I wasn't having it. I kept my camera off. I didn't want her to see me. Didn't want her to think there was any chance of reconciliation. This will be brief, I told her. My voice was cold, detached. The sum of your actions defines who you are. You made a decision without me, something you knew I wouldn't agree with. You mistook my love for obedience. Maybe, if you had been patient, we would have had a child by now. But patience is a virtue, one you failed to cultivate. As for your bitch of a mother, Isabella, she's still alive, and I doubt she'll die anytime soon. But when she does, I will come back just to piss on her grave. She and you killed my marriage, and you'll carry that guilt forever. I let the words settle. She didn't interrupt. She just sat there, silent, tears streaming down her face. Then I finished. As for me, I've moved on. I've started dating again. And I promise you this, I will never forgive you. I hope your mother dies without ever seeing a single grandchild. You reap what you sow. I'm reaping mine. And now, you're reaping yours. That's when she finally broke down completely. Through her sobs, she choked out something I didn't expect. The doctors, they told me I can never have children again. I frowned. What? During the miscarriage, they had to operate. My uterus was removed. I froze. I hadn't expected that. I wouldn't wish something like that on anyone, not even her. But it wasn't my burden to carry anymore. I ended the call without another word. That was the last time I heard from her. That was in 2019. Since then, I've been living in Montreal, rebuilding my life, recovering from her, from that nightmare, from all of it. It hasn't been easy, but it's been necessary. The divorce was finalized. We didn't have much to split, and I was only required to pay 1 year of alimony. Then the world shut down in 2020, and everything blurred together. Days blended into each other. I lost track of time. But honestly, none of it matters. That entire chapter of my life feels like fiction now, a distant memory, and I wish it wasn't real. But it was. And that's the story of how I lost everything and found myself again. Dear listeners, share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.